With GT7's 1.31 March update now upon us, it is of course time to talk about what it has brought. Not only in terms of new vehicles, new circuits, new details, which we will be covering here, but also in terms of changes, updates, improvements, racing events even. And of course one of the things that I mentioned yesterday when we broke down the trailer was that this month and this update were due to change physics, suspension physics, aero physics, and potentially changing performance point levels, as they often have in the past. That has happened, and I'm very curious to know from yourselves, since we all have our personal preferences of car and what tuning level we have on it, have you noticed any negative or positive changes to your vehicles? Now, for me, for example, the only vehicle that I immediately noticed a change on, because I use it so often, is my cash cow, the Mercedes SLR McLaren. I built it to 699 points, it's now dropped to 693, which is technically an improvement. I can now drop a bit more weight or increase the power a bit more. So in a rare occasion, that's actually an improvement, rather than jumping over the point level. But I would be curious, as I said, to know down below from yourselves if there's a car that feels notably different to you now, because obviously I can't drive everything and check back in as soon as I make the review. But to skip forward to the new content in this particular patch, of course we have some support related improvements, like the option of 120 frame per second support on the PS5. In terms of the content for circuits and cars though, we have two new variations of the Nurburgring. The longer, of course, endurance layout, which is, of course, part Nordschleife and part GP course. It'll be familiar to anyone who's driven on the Nürburgring, and equally familiar, but much, much shorter, as the name suggests, the sprint layout, which is a super short version of just the GP course. Takes barely a couple of minutes to do a lap, even in a road car. So you know what you're getting with the Nürburgring. If you're not a fan of the track, it's not going to win you over. If you are, it's always nice to have more options. Some will be disappointed that it's not a quote-unquote new track, in the full sense. It's a fair point, I guess, but you already know we're going to have variations here and there, so this is another month where that has happened. And I will say I would still rather have variations rather than nothing. It at least is something. Then as far as the cars, which of course is the part that I'm always looking forward to the most, we have 5 vehicles: the Porsche 904, the Porsche 959, the Audi RS5 Turbo DTM, the Mazda 3X, and of course the Toyota Alphard, the wild card, if you will. In fact, pretty much all of these vehicles, apart from maybe the Mazda, are kind of wildcards in their own way. The Audi is probably the most significant, being the only DTM car in the pure sense in the game, and being the first DTM car in quite some time, since Gran Turismo 6. That's why I've got the Red Bull livery on it, of course, an homage to the 2004 Audi A4 touring car that we used to have in Gran Turismo 6 and before. This car is very, very good. It's Group 2, so of course it has some natural rivals, just over 600 horsepower, less than a ton, less than 1,000 kilos in other words. The point level is, as you'd expect, relatively high, over 800, but it's properly quick, and I actually really like driving this thing. There's one major change that you can do to it visually, which is the rear wing. It does have a usable DRS system, which is very cool, and you can actually use that with the same button as NOS, or the boost button for the Tomahawk, to straighten out the rear wing, reduce the downforce, and of course improve straight line performance. But yeah, I'm actually really happy with this car. I'm not the biggest fan of Audi as a DTM team overall. I personally would probably root more for like Mercedes in the earlier 2000s, or even some of the later 2000s, and probably the Aston Martin more so than this these days. But still, any DTM car is very cool to have, and I think it's a very capable, well, it certainly is a very capable machine, but a very enjoyable one as well. It comes in at 1 million credits, and incidentally the entire pack will set you back about 5.4 million, just under, about 5.36, so not that bad as far as 5 cars go. Speaking of cash though, the most expensive one of the 5 is the Porsche 904. Both of the Porsches are in the Hagerty Legends dealership, the 2 most expensive of the pack. First of all, the 904 though is 2.5 million. As I predicted, it's a fantastic car for low power levels. Well under 200 horses, 179 in fact, and it's very, very good. You can step the tail out, get a bit slip-slidey as with any classic, but it's definitely very different to drive than a 911. Also, another clear example of why Porsche is so legendary in motorsport. It's another great car. and a very, very potentially useful one for those lower powered events, especially online, but maybe in career mode as well. I could see this thing being an OP weapon for sure. It's already good without any tuning, and that's more than you can say for some other classics. Moving on to, of course, the car that I had the highest hopes for, though, the 959. The 959, just as much of a legend, but in a different way, up against the Ferrari F40, the Jag XJ220, the Bugatti EB110 and others. A technical marvel from Porsche, fantastic in road form, race form and rally form. It's a formidable machine, kind of like this evolution of the 911, much wider, bigger platform, four-wheel drive. It's one of their most unique supercars, and in the game I fully expected it to be, at the very least, very capable for a car of its age, if not still great by today's standards. I will say, it definitely has a little bit of that skittishness, a little bit of that wallowy suspension that you'd expect from a car from 1987, and the only real issue that you'd need to iron out, at least stock compared to tuned, is it's a little bit unstable over the front end under really heavy braking if you're already starting to turn. And on an undulating circuit such as Road Atlanta, where I'm driving it here, you will notice that occasionally. It's 1.75 million credits to buy, so expensive enough to justify the car but not breaking the bank, and I would definitely say it's got a lot of potential. You can tune it up quite a bit as well, and it even has some interesting subtle little visual changes to make it look a bit more like the racing version, the 961 race car in particular. Next up we have probably the car which for many people is maybe the lesser interesting one, kind of the Vision GT slot of this update, if you will, the Mazda 3X. It's actually quite a decent little car. It's only 37,000 credits. The point level is, well, decent enough, 418, so it certainly isn't too high. It's got less than 180 horsepower. In fact, this is the least powerful car of the entire pack, just a fraction less than the Porsche, but it's not too heavy compared to other hot hatches. It is four-wheel drive as well. Interestingly, it's a naturally aspirated hot hatch, and it's actually quite good. It's very good to drive, very forgiving. Of course, it's easy to drive, and as with all of these cars, I will be talking more in depth about it over the next 5 days in their individual car reviews, but suffice it to say, this is a vehicle that you could easily sleep on, but I could see it being quite a good little tuning base. For those who do like racing hot hatches, it's a refreshing, different choice, and although it's not as exciting as something like a Mazda 3 MPS or a Mazda 6 MPS, or maybe even some other hot hatches from other brands, don't necessarily sleep on it. It's quite a good little car in its own way, and probably the one which will get overlooked for many people out of the 5. And last but definitely not least, the wildcard pick, of course, the Toyota Alphard. Very interesting machine, 2.2 tons, 300 horsepower stock, less than 400 points, probably not too surprisingly, and of course a very big vehicle, which doesn't give it the best of chase cams, but still kind of better than the Suzuki Escudo chase cam used to be in the older games. This one's actually really good to drive. Now I will say, I'm not going to claim it's, the new Renault Espace F1 by any stretch, although with some tuning you could have some fun with it, that's for sure. But it does handle better than you might think. The only issue I personally have with it, which tuning should sort out anyway, especially with a torque vector in center diff, is it feels a bit too much like a front-wheel drive car when exiting corners. When you really put the power down, it feels like it's got too much going to the front wheels rather than the back, and that creates quite a lot of heavy understeer or torque steer. So if you iron that out, you could have yourself a surprisingly quick big box. And for me, who loves racing novelty vehicles, I will definitely be doing some tuning on my own, see what we can build, and who knows, you could even have like a little racing van version of it, and certainly you could do plenty with it as a canvas for liveries as well. And incidentally, it's 75,000 credits. Sounds like a lot for a minivan, but in Gran Turismo terms it's really not that much, and much like the trucks in the game, it's something a bit different. It doesn't really have many, if any, natural rivals to go up against, but it's interesting, it's fresh. Again, it's more of a traditional kind of Gran Turismo pick like the Honda Odyssey and various others used to be, so it's a welcome addition. I know some people really seem to dislike this car being featured. I mean, I guess those people must be new to the Gran Turismo series, because if you've been playing for 6 and 4, this wouldn't be news to you at all. We've always had cars like this. It's more weird not to have stuff like this in the game, so I would assume that those people are probably more familiar with Sport and 7 rather than 1 through 6. But yeah, it's an interesting selection. I do like how eclectic it is. The Audi is probably the most significant, as I said, certainly the quickest. Both of the Porsches are very, very good. Don't sleep on the Mazda, and even the minivan does have some potential use, if nothing else as a novelty build, maybe as a weird little race build of some kind. As I said, I might try that myself, or just for the fun of it, make it really soft on suspension and flip it over through corners maybe, something like that. And we do also have some other additional things as well, such as an Escapes collection with blossoms, and some, not many, but some new career events as well. A couple of new menu books, and also a couple of new events as well, one geared more so towards Porsche in the actual racing events section as well. So in addition to what I've said, of course I'll have put on screen the scrolling list of all of the changes that they've implemented, or at least the ones that they've outlined. And of course, if you think that there's anything that really stood out to you that I didn't mention, absolutely drop that down below. So ultimately, that's it for my overall thoughts of 1.31. And of course, as I said, stick around for the next 5 days at least, wherein I will be featuring each of these cars in their individual breakdowns and maybe get into some tuning for a couple of them after that. But that's it for my thoughts. Of course, as I said, give me yours below. And until next time, I'll see you then. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.